The winter of 170 AD along the Danube River was harsh, even by the standards of men who had spent their lives on campaign. Snow lay thick across the Germanic frontier, muffling sound, transforming the world into something silent and alien. In the Roman military encampment, thousands of soldiers slept in their tents, exhausted from the day's march, wrapped in whatever wool and leather they could gather against the cold. But in the largest tent, the one marked by the imperial standards planted outside, a single oil lamp still burned. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, sat alone at a small wooden desk. He was 50 years old, though he looked older. The campaigns had aged him in ways that palace life never could. His beard was streaked with gray, his face lined with a kind of exhaustion that sleep no longer seemed to cure. He wore a simple tunic, not the purple of his office, and his feet were wrapped in wool against the drafts that crept beneath the tent's leather walls. Before him lay a small book, its pages already partially filled with his own handwriting. Greek letters, carefully formed despite the cold that made his fingers stiff. He was writing to himself, as he had done for years now, recording thoughts that no one else would read during his lifetime. Reminders, meditations, attempts to make sense of a world that seemed determined to break him. The camp outside was quiet, but it was never truly silent. Even now, in the depth of night, there were sounds. The rhythmic crunch of sentries walking their posts through fresh snow, the occasional whinny of a horse, the distant howl of wolves in the forests beyond the Roman lines, and beneath it all, the constant presence of the river, the Danube, flowing dark and cold toward the Black Sea. Marcus dipped his quill in ink and continued writing. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. The irony was not lost on him. He commanded the greatest empire the world had ever known. From Britannia to Egypt, from Hispania to Syria, millions of people lived and died under Roman law, Roman governance, Roman peace. At his word, legions marched. Cities prospered or fell into ruin. Men were elevated to positions of unimaginable wealth or condemned to death. He was, by any measure, the most powerful man on earth. And yet here, in this tent, with the cold seeping through the leather and the scratching of his quill the only sound, he felt utterly alone. This was not the loneliness of isolation. Marcus was surrounded constantly by people, staff officers, advisors, provincial governors, messengers arriving daily from Rome with reports and petitions. He was never physically alone, except in these stolen hours before dawn, when he sent everyone away and tried to remember who he was beneath the weight of the purple. No, this was a different kind of loneliness. The loneliness of responsibility so absolute that it could never truly be shared. Every decision he made affected millions. Every mistake compounded across an empire. And there was no one, truly no one, who could understand the full weight of that burden, because there was no one else who carried it. The brazier in the corner of the tent was dying, its coals fading from red to gray. Marcus should call for a slave to tend it, to bring more fuel to keep the cold at bay. But he did not. There was something clarifying about the discomfort, something that kept his mind sharp when exhaustion threatened to dull it. He had been on this frontier for years now, fighting a war that seemed to have no end. The Marcomanni, the Quadi, various Germanic tribes that Rome had once considered pacified, had risen in rebellion, crossing the Danube in numbers not seen in generations. They had pushed deep into Roman territory, had even threatened Italy itself. Marcus had come north to personally oversee the campaigns, to restore order, to push the barbarians back. But it was not a war like those his predecessors had fought. There were no great set-piece battles, no decisive victories that could be commemorated with triumphal arches. It was grinding, exhausting, a war of attrition fought in forests and snow, where progress was measured in miles gained and villages secured, only to have to secure them again the following season. His co-emperor, Lucius Verus, was dead. His wife Faustina was dead. His children, so many of his children, were dead. The plague that had swept through the empire had taken them, along with millions of others. The world Marcus had inherited, the world of peace and prosperity that his adoptive father, Antoninus Pius, had maintained so carefully, had crumbled. And it had been Marcus's lot to preside over that crumbling, to try to hold together what could be held, to accept what could not. Philosophy had prepared him for this, or so he had thought. From the age of 12, he had studied Stoicism, had learned from the great teachers of his age that virtue was the only good, that external events were neither good nor bad in themselves, that a wise man could maintain tranquility regardless of circumstance. But knowing something in theory and living it in practice were very different things. It was easy to be philosophical in a garden, surrounded by books and fruit trees, debating abstract questions of ethics and metaphysics. It was harder to maintain that equanimity when the reports came in of villages destroyed, of Roman citizens enslaved, of the frontier collapsing. It was harder still when your own body began to fail, when the pain in your joints made it difficult to mount a horse, when the headaches came so frequently that you could barely focus on the dispatches that required your attention. Marcus set down his quill and flexed his fingers, trying to work warmth back into them. Outside, the camp was beginning to wake. He could hear the first stirrings of activity, the voices of officers rousing their men, the clatter of equipment being prepared for the day's march. Soon, he would have to put on the mask again, would have to become Marcus Aurelius Augustus, Pontifex Maximus, commander of the legions, father of the fatherland. Would have to make decisions with confidence he did not always feel. Would have to inspire men who looked to him for certainty in uncertain times. But for now, for just a few more moments, he could sit in this tent and be simply Marcus. A man who was cold and tired and unsure whether anything he was doing mattered in the grand scheme of things. A man who wrote in a journal because it was the only way he knew to keep himself sane. He looked down at what he had written. The words stared back at him, both a comfort and an accusation. You have power over your mind. Did he? Or was his mind, like everything else, subject to forces beyond his control? The fatigue, the grief, the slow erosion of hope that came from years of unrelenting crisis. The lamp flickered. Morning was coming. The world would soon demand his attention, would pull him back into the endless machinery of governance and war. But in this moment, in the pre-dawn darkness of a tent on the edge of empire, Marcus Aurelius allowed himself to feel what he rarely permitted himself to acknowledge. He was lonely, profoundly, existentially lonely. And all the power in the world could not change that simple fact. The boy was born Marcus Annius Verus in the year 121 AD, into a family of extraordinary privilege and connections. His father, also named Marcus Annius Verus, was a Roman senator of praetorian rank. His mother, Domitia Lucilla, came from one of the wealthiest families in Rome. From birth, Marcus was surrounded by luxury, education, and expectation. But it was his great-grandfather who truly shaped his early destiny. Marcus Annius Verus the Elder was not only wealthy, but politically connected in ways that mattered. He had served as consul twice and was a close friend and advisor to the Emperor Hadrian himself. When the boy's father died young, leaving Marcus fatherless at the age of 3. It was his grandfather who took over his upbringing and his grandfather's connections that would eventually change the course of Roman history. Hadrian noticed the boy early. There was something about young Marcus that caught the emperor's attention. Perhaps it was his seriousness, his evident intelligence, or the way he seemed to absorb learning with an intensity unusual in a child. Whatever it was, Hadrian gave the boy a nickname that would follow him through his youth. Verissimus, the truest one, the most genuine. It was both an honor and a burden, that name. To be singled out by an emperor, to be marked as special, meant that ordinary childhood was no longer possible. Marcus was being watched, evaluated, groomed for something, though what that something was remained unclear during Hadrian's lifetime. Marcus's education was exceptional, even by Roman aristocratic standards. He studied with the finest tutors Rome could provide: rhetoric, grammar, literature, philosophy, law. He learned Greek fluently, spoke it as well as Latin, and immersed himself in the classical texts that formed the foundation of elite Roman culture. Homer, Euripides, Plato, Aristotle. These were not just subjects to be studied, but worlds to inhabit. But something happened when Marcus was around 12 years old, something that would define the rest of his life. He encountered Stoic philosophy, and it struck him with the force of conversion. Stoicism had been around for centuries by then, founded in Athens and brought to Rome, where it found fertile ground among the practical-minded Roman elite. It taught that virtue was the only true good, that external circumstances were indifferent, that the wise man achieved tranquility by accepting what he could not control and focusing only on his own choices and character. For Marcus, it was revelation. Here was a framework for living that made sense of a world that often did not. Here was a path to meaning that did not depend on the fickle gifts of fortune, on wealth or power or fame, but on something internal, something that could not be taken away. He threw himself into Stoic practice with the intensity that would characterize everything he did. He gave up his comfortable bed and began sleeping on the floor, on a simple mat like the Greek philosophers. He stopped wearing the fine clothes appropriate to his station and instead dressed in a rough philosopher's cloak. He turned away from the typical entertainments of Roman youth, the gladiatorial games and chariot races, preferring to spend his time in libraries and philosophical discussions. His mother was horrified. This was not how a young Roman aristocrat of his standing was supposed to behave. She convinced him, eventually, to moderate some of his more extreme practices, to at least sleep on a bed with a skin covering the mat. But she could not convince him to abandon philosophy. It had become too central to who he was. The library became Marcus's refuge. In the villa where he lived, there was a room filled with scrolls and codices, works of philosophy and history, poetry and drama. Sunlight streamed through high windows, illuminating dust motes that drifted in the still air. The smell of papyrus and beeswax tablets, the feel of a scroll unfurling between his fingers, the silence broken only by the occasional turning of a page. This was where Marcus felt most himself, but the world had other plans for him. In 138 AD, Emperor Hadrian died. His successor, Antoninus Pius, was a senator whom Hadrian had adopted specifically to be emperor. But there was a condition. Antoninus had to adopt 2 sons as his own heirs. One was Lucius Verus, the son of Hadrian's original choice for successor. The other was the 17-year-old Marcus Aurelius. Suddenly, the trajectory of Marcus's life became clear. He was not going to be a philosopher living a private life of contemplation. He was going to be emperor. The entire Roman world would eventually be his responsibility, whether he wanted it or not. Antoninus Pius was a good emperor, perhaps one of the best Rome ever had. His reign was peaceful, prosperous, and stable. He was a patient teacher, bringing Marcus into the machinery of imperial governance gradually, showing him how decisions were made, how the provinces were administered, how the endless flow of petitions and reports was managed. Marcus learned. He sat through Senate meetings, attended to judicial proceedings, studied military strategy and provincial finance. The vast marble corridors of the Palatine Hill became his classroom, and the running of an empire became his curriculum. But he never abandoned philosophy. Even as his duties increased, even as he took on more responsibilities, he continued his studies. He corresponded with leading Stoic teachers, particularly Junius Rusticus, who became perhaps his most important philosophical mentor. Every morning, before the business of the day began, Marcus would spend time in reflection and study, trying to hold on to the person he had been before the weight of destiny settled on his shoulders. There was a tension in this life, a fundamental divide between what Marcus wanted and what was required of him. He wanted to live simply, to pursue wisdom, to spend his days in contemplation and study. But he was being prepared for a life of unimaginable complexity and responsibility, a life where contemplation would be a luxury stolen in brief moments between crises. The halls of the Palatine were vast and beautiful, decorated with the finest art the empire could provide. But they were also cold, their marble floors echoing with footsteps, their high ceilings making even crowds seem small and isolated. Marcus walked those halls for years, moving between meetings and obligations, always surrounded by people, yet always fundamentally alone. He was being encased in gold and purple, fitted with the armor of statecraft piece by piece. Antoninus was kind, as emperors went, and Marcus was genuinely fond of him. But there was no escaping what was happening. The boy who had slept on the floor and read philosophy by lamplight was becoming something else. Not by choice, but by the inexorable logic of succession and power. In 145 AD, Marcus married Faustina the Younger, daughter of Antoninus Pius. She was his cousin, and the marriage was clearly dynastic, arranged to further cement Marcus's position as heir. But by all accounts, it was a genuine love match. Faustina would bear him many children and remain his companion through the decades that followed. The years passed. Marcus grew into his role, became more comfortable with the exercise of power, even as he remained ambivalent about power itself. He read philosophy, wrote notes to himself, tried to live according to the principles he had learned. He was, as Hadrian had named him, Verissimus, the truest one, not true to imperial dignity or Roman tradition, but true to himself, to the philosophical commitments he had made as a boy. And then, in 161 AD, Antoninus Pius died. The peaceful reign was over, and Marcus Aurelius, philosopher, reluctant statesman, devoted student of wisdom, became Emperor of Rome. The golden afternoon light that had illuminated his youthful studies was fading. A different kind of day was dawning, harsher and less forgiving. And Marcus would spend the rest of his life trying to remain true to his principles in a world that seemed designed to break them. The day Marcus became emperor should have been the pinnacle of any man's ambition. To be raised to the purple, to command the greatest empire the world had ever known, to have millions of subjects hanging on your every word. For almost anyone else in Rome, it would have been the fulfillment of a lifelong dream. But Marcus did something that shocked the Senate and set the tone for what would become one of Rome's most unusual reigns. He refused to rule alone. He insisted that Lucius Verus, his adoptive brother, be elevated alongside him as co-emperor with equal authority. This was unprecedented. Rome had seen brief periods of shared rule before, but never by design, never as a matter of deliberate policy. The Senate was confused. Lucius was younger, less experienced, less obviously suited to imperial power. But Marcus was adamant. They would rule together, or he would not rule at all. Perhaps it was loneliness that motivated him, a desire not to carry the burden alone. Perhaps it was genuine affection for Lucius, who had been his companion since childhood. Or perhaps it was philosophy, the Stoic principle that cooperation was more virtuous than domination, that power should be shared rather than hoarded. Whatever the reason, Rome suddenly had two emperors. And for a brief moment, it seemed like the empire might enjoy a golden age to rival even the reign of Antoninus Pius. The early 160s were a time of prosperity. The provinces were at peace. Trade flourished. The grain ships from Egypt arrived on schedule, keeping Rome's enormous population fed. The legions were strong and well supplied. The frontiers were secure. It was the high water mark of the Pax Romana, the Roman peace that had prevailed for nearly 2 centuries. In 166 AD, Rome celebrated a magnificent triumph. Lucius Verus had been campaigning in the east against the Parthian Empire, Rome's great rival beyond the Euphrates. The campaign had been successful, pushing the Parthians back and securing Rome's eastern provinces. Now the victorious army was returning, and Rome prepared to honor them in the traditional way. A Roman triumph was spectacle elevated to the level of religious ritual. It began at the Campus Martius, outside the old city walls, and proceeded through the Forum to the Temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill. The entire route was lined with crowds, hundreds of thousands of Romans who had gathered to witness the glory of their empire made manifest. The sensory experience was overwhelming. Flowers had been scattered along the route, rose petals and violets crushed beneath the feet of the crowd, releasing their scent into the warm air. Incense burned in braziers placed at regular intervals, filling the streets with smoke that caught the afternoon light. The smell of frankincense, myrrh, and crushed petals mixed with the more prosaic odors of a city packed beyond capacity with human bodies. The noise was deafening. The crowd roared, a sound like the ocean, rising and falling but never truly silent. Above it, musicians played, horns and drums marking time for the procession. Prisoners of war shuffled in chains, their heads bowed. Carts displayed the spoils of conquest, gold and silver and exotic goods from the east. Soldiers marched in formation, their armor polished to mirror brightness, reflecting the sun in painful flashes. And at the center of it all, riding in a golden chariot, stood the emperors. Marcus and Lucius, crowned with laurel, dressed in the purple robes of triumph, painted with the red ochre that was supposed to make them resemble Jupiter himself. The heat was intense. It was summer in Rome, and the sun beat down on the cobblestones with crushing force. Heat radiated up from the ground, creating shimmering waves in the air. Marcus could feel sweat running down his back beneath the heavy robes. The golden chariot, magnificent to look at, was uncomfortable to stand in, its floor rough beneath his feet, its sides pressing close. Behind him, following tradition, a slave held a golden crown above his head and whispered in his ear the ritual phrase meant to prevent hubris. Remember, you are mortal. As if he could forget. As if the philosophy he had studied his entire life had not hammered that truth into every corner of his consciousness. He was mortal. This triumph was temporary. The cheering would fade. The glory would pass. Everything was impermanent. Everything was fleeting. And the only thing that truly mattered was whether he acted virtuously in his brief time on earth. The crowd pressed close, reaching out as if to touch the divine. Their faces were ecstatic, transported by the spectacle. For them, this was validation, proof that Rome was still great, still powerful, still favored by the gods. They did not see the exhausted men behind the pageantry, the political calculations that had gone into staging this display, the fragility that wealth and power could not overcome. Marcus felt utterly detached from it all. He stood in the center of the greatest celebration Rome could offer, with the love and adulation of millions surrounding him like a physical force. And he felt nothing but a kind of quiet sadness. This was not what mattered. This noise, this spectacle, this temporary flash of glory. What mattered was whether he ruled justly, whether he upheld the law, whether he served his people rather than using them. Wine flowed freely through the streets. Silver goblets were passed hand to hand, filled and refilled from amphorae that seemed endless. The taste was sweet and sharp. The good Italian wines that Rome was famous for, mixed with honey and spices. But even that pleasure felt hollow. The wine would be metabolized, its effects would fade, and tomorrow there would be work to do. Decisions to make, the endless grind of governance that no triumph could postpone forever. The procession wound through the Forum, past the temples and basilicas that represented centuries of Roman power. The buildings rose on either side, marble and granite, monuments to ambition and achievement. But Marcus had read enough history to know how many of those monuments were built by men now forgotten, emperors whose names survived only in inscriptions, generals whose victories had seemed eternal at the time, but were now merely footnotes. Lucius, standing beside him in the chariot, was thoroughly enjoying himself. He waved to the crowd, basked in their adoration, smiled with genuine pleasure at the spectacle. He was younger, less philosophical, more comfortable with the trappings of power. For Lucius, this triumph was pure victory, uncomplicated by doubt or introspection. Marcus envied him that simplicity, even as he knew he could never share it. His mind would not allow him to simply enjoy the moment. It insisted on analyzing, questioning, placing everything in its proper philosophical context. And in that context, a triumph was just another event, neither good nor bad in itself, simply something that happened. The procession ended at the Temple of Jupiter, where the emperors would offer sacrifice and give thanks to the gods. The crowd pressed close, still cheering, still caught up in the ecstasy of the moment. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the Forum, painting the marble buildings in shades of gold and amber. This was the peak. This was Rome at its greatest, the empire at its most powerful, the moment when everything seemed possible and permanent. The twilight hour, when the light was most beautiful because it was about to fade. Marcus knew what was coming, even if no one else did. He could feel it, a dark intuition that had nothing to do with philosophy and everything to do with the way the world worked. This perfection could not last. History did not allow for permanent golden ages. Something was about to break. He just did not know yet what form that breaking would take. The soldiers returning from the east, celebrating their victory, carrying their spoils through the streets of Rome, had brought something else with them. Something invisible. Something that would transform triumph into catastrophe and teach Marcus that no amount of power or philosophy could protect against the cruelty of chance. They had brought the plague. It started slowly, almost imperceptibly. A few soldiers fell ill shortly after returning from the east. Then a few more. At first, no one was particularly concerned. Armies always brought disease. Men living in close quarters, marching through foreign lands, were constantly exposed to illness. This seemed no different. But it was different. This was something Rome had never encountered before, a disease so virulent, so deadly that it would fundamentally alter the course of the empire. Modern historians call it the Antonine Plague, named after Marcus's family. At the time, they called it simply the pestilence, and they watched in growing horror as it spread through the city. The symptoms were terrible. High fever that came on suddenly, violent enough to cause delirium. A rash that covered the body. Pustules that oozed and left disfiguring scars on those who survived. Vomiting, diarrhea, the body turning against itself. And then, for many, death. Quick for some, agonizingly slow for others. It spread through Rome like fire through dry grass. The dense population of the city, over 1 million people packed into insulae and tenements, created perfect conditions for transmission. The poor died in droves, their bodies carried out each morning in carts. But wealth provided no protection. The disease did not discriminate. Senators fell ill, equestrians died. Even the imperial household was not immune. Marcus watched his city transform. The streets that had so recently been filled with celebrating crowds became empty, silent except for the occasional sound of weeping or the creaking wheels of death carts. The markets closed. The baths, once centers of social life, emptied as people realized they were vectors for transmission. Even the theaters shut their doors. The smell of smoke became constant, oppressive. Funeral pyres burned day and night on the outskirts of the city. So many pyres that they clouded the sun, turning daylight gray and dim. The smoke drifted through the streets, a perpetual reminder of mortality, carrying with it the acrid scent of burning flesh and wood. Marcus did everything he could. He organized relief efforts, distributing grain from the imperial storehouses to prevent starvation. He brought in physicians from across the empire, though they were helpless against a disease they did not understand. He performed the religious rituals required of him as Pontifex Maximus, leading sacrifices and prayers to the gods, though he privately doubted whether the gods, if they existed at all, were listening. And the plague kept spreading. From Rome, it radiated outward through the empire, following the roads and sea lanes that had been built to facilitate trade and military movement. Every province was affected: Egypt, Syria, Gaul, Hispania. The death toll was staggering. Modern estimates suggest that between 5 and 10 million people died during the first wave of the plague, perhaps 1/10 of the entire imperial population. Then, in 169 AD, Lucius Verus fell ill. Marcus's co-emperor, his adoptive brother, the man who had stood beside him during the triumph just 3 years earlier, succumbed to the plague. He died in January, leaving Marcus to rule alone. The isolation Marcus had always felt became absolute. He was now the sole emperor of a dying world, responsible for everything, able to truly share the burden with no one. The philosophical principles he had studied his entire life were being tested in the harshest possible way. Marcus's own family was not spared. Of his 13 children with Faustina, at least 5 died during his reign, likely victims of the plague or other diseases. To watch your children die, to hold their fevered bodies and know that all your power means nothing, that you cannot save them any more than you could save the poorest beggar in Rome, is a lesson in helplessness that philosophy can only partially prepare you for. In 175 AD, Faustina herself died while accompanying Marcus on campaign. The exact cause is unclear. Some sources suggest illness, others suggest complications from childbirth. But for Marcus, it was another loss in a decade of losses, another reminder that nothing in this world is permanent, that even love and companionship are temporary gifts that can be taken away without warning. The financial strain on the empire was enormous. The plague had killed taxpayers, destroyed agricultural production, disrupted trade. The imperial treasury, once overflowing, was running low. Marcus needed funds to continue the wars on the frontier, to maintain the legions, to keep the empire functioning. So he did something extraordinary and telling. He held a public auction of imperial property. The palace treasuries were opened, and their contents were spread out in the Forum of Trajan for all to see. Golden goblets and silver platters, jeweled ornaments, silks and fine furniture. The accumulated luxuries of centuries of imperial rule. Marcus sold it all, not because he personally cared about such things, but because the state needed money, and this was a way to raise it without crushing the already suffering population with new taxes. It was a practical decision, but it was also symbolic. The emperor himself was living simply, accepting hardship, setting an example. The Forum during those days of auction was a strange place. People came to gawk at the treasures, to bid if they could afford it, or simply to witness this unprecedented event. The atmosphere was subdued, nothing like the joyous triumph of years before. The plague had taught everyone the lesson that Marcus had always known intellectually, but was now learning viscerally. Nothing lasts, nothing is secure, and all the wealth in the world cannot buy safety or happiness. Marcus moved through these years in a kind of numb endurance. He did what needed to be done, made the decisions that needed to be made, maintained the facade of imperial authority even as the world crumbled around him. But internally, he was hollowing out, the repeated blows of loss and crisis wearing away at something essential. He wrote more frequently in his journal during this period. The meditations, as they would later be called, took shape in the quiet moments stolen between crises. They were not meant for publication, not written for posterity. They were Marcus talking to himself, reminding himself of philosophical principles that seemed increasingly abstract in the face of concrete suffering. Everything is only for a day, both that which remembers and that which is remembered. Death hangs over you. While you live, while you can, become good. How much time he gains who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does or thinks. These were not the thoughts of a man at peace. They were the thoughts of someone desperately trying to maintain equilibrium, to find meaning in suffering, to convince himself that his philosophical training had not been in vain. The plague eventually subsided, though it would return in waves over the following decades. Rome would never fully recover the population levels it had reached before the pestilence. The empire would never quite recapture the confidence and optimism of the early 160s. And Marcus, having survived disease, loss, and the collapse of the world he had known, would spend his final years on a cold frontier, fighting a war that seemed to have no end, trying to hold together an empire that was fracturing despite all his efforts. The invisible enemy had taught him what philosophy alone could not. That virtue, while perhaps sufficient for inner peace, was not sufficient to prevent catastrophe. That the wise man could not remain truly untouched by external events, no matter what the Stoics claimed. That being a good person, a philosophical emperor, did not make you powerful enough to protect those you loved. The air in Rome during those years was thick, stagnant with grief and smoke. The markets that reopened did so quietly, without celebration. The city that had been the center of the world felt diminished, haunted by the memory of what it had been. And Marcus, walking through those empty streets, felt the weight of every death, every loss, every failure. He was emperor, yes, but he was also just a man, grieving and exhausted and profoundly, achingly alone. The frontier along the Danube River in the 170s was a world away from the marble halls of Rome. This was the edge of civilization, where Roman order met Germanic chaos, where the language of law and philosophy gave way to the simpler language of survival. Marcus had come north to personally command the campaigns against the Marcomanni, Quadi, and other Germanic tribes that had breached the frontier. It was not a choice made lightly. Emperors generally commanded from a distance, delegating military matters to generals while they remained in Rome, or toured the more pleasant provinces. But the situation was desperate enough that Marcus felt his presence was necessary. So he left the city, left the comfort of the palace, and came to live among soldiers in a military camp on the banks of a river that marked the edge of the known world. The camp was a small city in itself, laid out with the geometric precision that Romans applied to everything. Straight streets intersected at right angles. The Praetorium, the commander's headquarters where Marcus lived, was at the center. Surrounding it were the tents of the legions, organized by century and cohort. A vast canvas city that could be struck and moved within hours if necessary. But unlike the campaigns of earlier centuries, this was not a war of conquest. This was defense, desperate and grinding. The Germanic tribes had learned to fight Romans effectively, had learned to avoid pitched battles where Roman discipline and organization gave them an advantage, instead striking quickly and melting back into the forests before retribution could be organized. Marcus was not a natural military commander. He had studied strategy and tactics as part of his imperial education, but he was fundamentally a man of books and contemplation, not a warrior. Yet here he was, spending year after year on campaign, dealing with the daily realities of military life. The mud was constant. In spring and autumn, the entire camp became a quagmire, with water and earth mixing into a thick paste that clung to everything. Boots sank inches deep with every step, making even simple movement exhausting. The sounds of the camp changed with the mud, the sharp crack of footsteps on hard ground replaced by a sucking, squelching sound that was somehow more depressing. The soldiers adapted to it, as soldiers always do. They built duckboards and stone paths, reinforced tent sites with logs, did what was necessary to function in the conditions they were given. But it wore on them. Wet wool never properly dries in such conditions, and the smell of damp cloth and unwashed bodies became the default aroma of the camp. Marcus shared in the discomfort as much as his position allowed. He did not sleep in a proper building, did not demand luxuries that his men could not have. He wore simple clothing, ate army rations, supplemented only slightly, and made a point of being visible, walking through the camp, speaking with officers and ordinary soldiers alike. The men respected him for it, though respect and affection are different things. Marcus was not the kind of commander who inspired love through charisma or shared danger. He inspired respect through his obvious commitment to duty, his refusal to abandon his post despite his age and evident poor health, because Marcus was not well. The years of stress, loss, and now the physical demands of campaign life were taking their toll. He suffered from chronic stomach problems, likely an ulcer, that caused him constant pain. He had recurring headaches, possibly migraines, that sometimes left him unable to function for hours. His joints ached from arthritis, making it difficult to ride or even walk for extended periods. His physician Galen, one of the most famous doctors of antiquity, accompanied him on campaign and did what he could. But ancient medicine was limited. Pain relief came from opium, which dulled the mind along with the pain. Other remedies were more superstition than science. Marcus endured because endurance was what duty demanded. In 172 AD, during one of the many campaigns of this extended war, something remarkable happened. A Roman legion, possibly the 12th Fulminata, found itself trapped by Germanic forces. The details are murky, as they often are for events this far in the past. But the basic facts seem clear. The legion was surrounded, cut off from supplies, dying of thirst under the summer sun. And then the rain came. It was not a normal rain, not a brief summer shower. It was a torrential downpour, the kind that turns day into twilight, that drums on helmets with such force that men cannot hear their own thoughts. The sky opened up, and water fell in sheets. The Romans, desperate with thirst, tilted their heads back and opened their mouths, catching the rain, filling their helmets and drinking deep. Their horses, equally parched, drank from the puddles forming instantly in the churned earth. It was salvation, delivered at the moment when all seemed lost. But the rain did more than save the Romans. It disrupted the Germanic forces, turned the battlefield into a swamp, created conditions where the superior organization and equipment of the legions could assert themselves. The battle that followed was confused and brutal, fought in mud and driving rain, but the Romans prevailed. The legion was saved. This event became known as the Rain Miracle, and various factions claimed credit for it. Christians in the legion said their prayers had been answered. Pagans attributed it to traditional Roman gods. Egyptian priests in Marcus's entourage claimed it was the work of their deity Thoth. Marcus himself, ever the philosopher, likely saw it as simple chance, the weather turning at a fortunate moment. What the rain miracle represented, beyond its immediate tactical significance, was the kind of war Marcus was fighting. Not glorious, not filled with heroic charges and decisive victories, but a war of survival and endurance. A war where victory meant simply living to fight another day, where a rainstorm could mean the difference between annihilation and survival. The campaigns continued, year after grinding year. Marcus grew older on that frontier, his beard turning white, his body failing him piece by piece. He was approaching 60, an advanced age by Roman standards, and he looked even older. The young man who had slept on floors and worn philosophers' cloaks seemed impossibly distant now. The Germanic tribes were gradually pushed back, but never decisively defeated. For every village secured, another was threatened. For every chief who submitted, another rose in rebellion. It was the kind of war that could consume generations, that had no clear end point, that simply had to be endured until one side or the other could endure no more. Marcus spent his evenings in his tent, writing. The meditations were taking their final form during these years, a philosophy forged not in the comfortable gardens of Rome, but in the mud and blood of the frontier. The thoughts were darker now, more focused on death and impermanence, on the necessity of accepting what cannot be changed. The universe is change. Our life is what our thoughts make it. Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking. Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. These were not academic exercises. These were survival techniques, ways of maintaining sanity and purpose in circumstances that would break most men. Marcus was teaching himself how to continue, how to find meaning in meaninglessness, how to do his duty when his duty had become unending and thankless. The soldiers around him aged as well. Men who had been young when they arrived on the frontier were now veterans, gray-bearded and scarred. Some had spent their entire military careers in these campaigns, 20 years or more of service on the Danube, fighting an enemy that never quite went away. The bond between Marcus and his army was strange. They did not love him the way soldiers had loved Julius Caesar or would love later emperors who shared their dangers more dramatically. But they respected him. They knew he did not want to be there, knew he was sick and old, and would rather be anywhere else. And yet, he stayed. He did his duty. And for soldiers, for whom duty was everything, that mattered. The gray Germanic sky pressed down on the camps like a physical weight. It rained frequently, cold autumn rains that chilled to the bone. The smell of wet wool and leather became so constant that no one noticed it anymore. The sucking mud, the distant howling of wolves, the occasional distant glow of burning villages, these were the constants of life on the frontier. Marcus was the last connection to the old world, to the golden age of Antoninus Pius, to the peace and prosperity that most of these soldiers had never known. He represented continuity, the idea that Rome endured, that the empire they served still existed, even if it felt very far away from these muddy camps. But he was also a man visibly diminishing, his health failing, his strength fading. Everyone in the army knew that when Marcus died, something would end. They did not yet know what his son Commodus was like, what kind of emperor he would be. But they could see in Marcus's eyes, in the way he looked at his son during the rare visits to the frontier, that the old emperor was not confident about the succession. Still, Marcus endured. He rose each morning, attended to his duties, made his decisions, wrote his meditations. He was doing what Stoicism had always taught, controlling what he could control, accepting what he could not, and finding virtue in the act of simply continuing when everything urged him to give up. The iron and rain of the Germanic frontier had become his world. Not the world he would have chosen, but the world he had been given. And philosophy had taught him that the wise man does not complain about the world he has been given. He simply lives in it as best he can. In March of 180 AD, Marcus Aurelius was in Vindobona, a military camp on the Danube that would one day become Vienna. He was 58 years old, though he looked ancient. The campaigns had finally ended, or at least paused. The Germanic tribes had been pushed back, treaties had been signed, and there was talk of returning to Rome. But Marcus knew he would never see Rome again. His body was failing in ways that could no longer be ignored or endured. The stomach pains had become constant and severe. He could barely eat without nausea. His strength was gone, leaving him bedridden most days. Fever came and went, each time leaving him weaker. Galen, his physician, did what he could. But they both knew the truth. Marcus was dying, not from any single disease that could be diagnosed and treated, but from exhaustion, from the accumulated toll of years of stress and hardship, from a body that had simply been asked to do too much for too long. The room where Marcus lay was simple, befitting a military camp rather than an imperial palace. Clean linen sheets, the best that could be provided, but still just army issue. A brazier in the corner provided some warmth against the late winter chill. The walls were canvas and wood, not marble, and the sounds of the camp filtered through. Voices, footsteps, the eternal routines of military life. Light came through the tent opening, the soft gray light of a late afternoon in early spring. It was not the golden Mediterranean light Marcus had grown up with in Rome, but something gentler, more muted. The kind of light that made everything seem distant and slightly unreal. Marcus drifted in and out of consciousness. When he was awake, his mind was surprisingly clear, not clouded by the fever. It was as if his body was failing while his mind remained sharp, allowing him to be fully present for his own death. Commodus was there, his son, the heir who would inherit the empire. He was 19 years old, handsome, athletic, everything a Roman emperor should be in appearance. But Marcus knew, with the clarity that comes at the end of life, that his son was not ready, perhaps could never be ready. Commodus lacked the philosophical grounding, the sense of duty, the understanding of what it meant to serve rather than to rule. Marcus had tried to prepare him, had brought him on campaign, had attempted to instill the values he himself had been taught. But you cannot force wisdom on someone, cannot make them love philosophy if they do not. Commodus was interested in other things: gladiatorial games, hunting, the pleasures and spectacles that Marcus had always found hollow. There were others in the room as well: advisors, physicians, officers who had served with Marcus for years. They maintained a respectful silence, understanding that they were witnessing the end of an era. When Marcus died, the age of the Antonines would die with him. Whatever came after would be something different. Marcus's thoughts drifted. He thought about his youth, about sleeping on floors and reading philosophy by lamplight, about his teachers, long dead now, especially Junius Rusticus, who had shaped his understanding of Stoicism, about Antoninus Pius, his adoptive father, who had shown him what a good emperor could be. He thought about Faustina, 5 years in her grave now, and about their children, so many of them dead before their time. The plague had taken them, or disease, or the simple cruelty of chance. Commodus had survived, which was something, though perhaps not the something Marcus would have chosen. He thought about the frontier, about the years spent in mud and rain, fighting a war that had no glory, only necessity. About the soldiers who had followed him, who had trusted him to lead them well, to spend their lives wisely rather than wastefully. He hoped he had done that, though he could not be certain. Most of all, he thought about duty. That had been the organizing principle of his life, the thing that had sustained him through loss and suffering and the endless demands of a power. He had not wanted to be emperor, had not sought the throne, but it had fallen to him and he had done his duty. For 20 years, through plague and war and personal tragedy, he had done what was required of him. And now finally, that duty was ending. The burden was being lifted. The weight that had pressed down on him for so long was growing lighter. There was a kind of peace in that realization. Not joy, exactly, but relief. The relief of a soldier who has stood watch through a long, cold night and is finally being told he can rest. That someone else will take the watch. That he has done enough. The Stoics taught that death was nothing to fear, that it was simply a natural process, the soul returning to the universal reason from which it came. Marcus had read those teachings, had meditated on them, had tried to internalize them. Now he would discover if they were true. His breathing was shallow, each breath an effort. The physicians hovering nearby knew the signs, knew that this was the end. They had seen it countless times, the way the body slowly shut down, the way consciousness dimmed like a lamp running out of oil. Marcus's last recorded words were reported by the historian Dio Cassius. When asked how he felt, Marcus replied, "Go to the rising sun, for I am already setting." It was so perfectly Marcus, that response. Philosophical even in extremis, turning his death into a metaphor, directing attention away from himself toward his successor. Go to the rising sun, go to Commodus, the new day, the future. But there was something else in those words, something like resignation or perhaps even relief. I am already setting. The day is ending. The long watch is finally over. As the afternoon light faded and evening approached, Marcus Aurelius died. It was March 17th, 180 AD. He had been emperor for 19 years, had lived 58 years, and had spent most of that life trying to be good, trying to do his duty, trying to maintain philosophical equanimity in a world that seemed designed to destroy it. The news spread through the camp in whispers. The emperor was dead. Soldiers who had served under him for years stood silent, not quite believing it, even though they had seen it coming. Officers began the necessary arrangements, the rituals of imperial succession, the messages that would need to be sent to Rome and to the provinces. Commodus became emperor that evening, acclaimed by the troops as tradition demanded. He would return to Rome, would end the Germanic campaigns that his father had spent years prosecuting, would begin a reign that historians would remember as the beginning of Rome's decline. But that was the future, and Marcus was done with the future. His body was prepared for its journey back to Rome, where it would be cremated with full honors and his ashes placed in the mausoleum of Hadrian. But that was just flesh, just matter returning to matter. Whatever Marcus had been, whatever had made him himself, was gone. Released, finally, from the prison of duty and power and endless responsibility. The loneliest man on earth was alone no more, having passed into the silence that awaits all things. The tent where he died was struck the next day, folded and packed like all the other tents in the camp. The army prepared to march. Life continued, as it always does, indifferent to the passing of even emperors. But in that moment, in that quiet evening in Vindobona, something ended. Not just a life, but an ideal. The dream of the Philosopher King, of power exercised with wisdom and virtue, of empire as a moral project rather than mere domination. Marcus had tried. He had tried so hard to be good, to rule well, to maintain his principles in the face of everything the world threw at him. Whether he succeeded is a question without a clear answer. The empire endured for a time, but so did suffering, injustice, and all the things that philosophy could name, but not prevent. In the end, he was just a man. Powerful, yes, but still just a man. Lonely, tired, doing his best in impossible circumstances. And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps trying despite everything is its own kind of victory. The sun set over the Danube that evening, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple. The river flowed on, as it always had and always would, indifferent to the small dramas of human life playing out along its banks. And Marcus, the most powerful man on earth, the loneliest man in the world, finally found the peace that had eluded him in life. The burden was lifted, the duty was done, the soul was released.